Before we start the lecture, I would like to, because this is the first time that we are going to meet, even though online. Earlier it was through only the video. So far, now we have discussed about 4 topics up to now. And do you have any suggestions or questions, queries? Because I want to adjust to your requirements. If you can tell me whether there is anything that I have to change or improve, any idea? Hello? Okay. Now, again, before we start, central banking is because last time, previously we had only this video records. Now we can communicate, online. You know that central banking is a very live subject, and also central bank is as you know, so you may have studied in other courses also, central bank is the center point of the financial system. And also central bank is also a major player in economic management, advising the government, and also studying the economy, and also guiding other areas is the main role of the central bank. In addition to that, central bank is also considered as one pillar of macroeconomic management. Other pillar is the government. One side, the fiscal policy is coming from the government, and the monetary policy is coming from the central bank. And also later on, we will discuss. I'm just going to give you a warming up session before we start with the topic. You can see the central bank has a long-term view, whereas the government has a relatively shorter view, because the time horizon of the central bank is very long. Why? The reason is, whatever the policies that the central bank introduces now is not going to have an impact immediately. It will have impact coming from the short term. There will be short-term impact, medium-term impact, long-term impact. So central bank has to be always with a long-term view, whereas sometimes the government or the fiscal policy, it doesn't matter which government, which country, the political authorities' time horizon is the period they are in power. And also, when it gets closer to the end of the given regime, sometimes they may be focusing more on winning votes than managing the economy. That's natural. Not only in Sri Lanka, in other countries also like that. So therefore, we have to look at very carefully the behavior of a central bank, and also from time to time, what are the factors that make the central bank to change the policies. Whether there are local factors or domestic factors or international factors. All those things we have to be very careful, especially when we operate in the banking and financial sector. Most of the activities of the central bank affect the banking and financial sector directly and also indirectly. Therefore, we have to look at the practical aspect of central banking, because sometimes I have seen students focus only on the theoretical parts. When it comes to the practical side of it, sometimes they are a little bit poor in analyzing things. So I want to inculcate a culture where together as a team, I am just a team leader, to inculcate a culture where to look at the central bank operations in a critical light. We should be able to analyze central bank actions critically. For us to understand that, we have to know the background of the central bank. And so far, we have discussed general central banking and also central banking with respect to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka that we have done. With that understanding, let's go to the slides. I am going to present the balance part of the lecture 4, because in the video, I could not cover the entirety of it. It was a little lengthy one. There are a few departments we have to discuss under lecture number 4. Then we will shift to lecture number 5. Have you all got lecture number 5 slides? Hello? Gayumi Bandara. Gerald, do you hear me? Hello? How in there? Can Gerald hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. 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 Now let's go to the slides. And last time, before that, did you receive this PowerPoint presentation for lecture number 5? Yes. Have you? Hello? Okay. Doesn't matter. Now we discussed about the currency department, and also there you will get the video for this in the video under the lecture number 4. That video went up to currency department, and today we have to discuss about that is the balance part of the balance part is this. We are going to discuss that today, and after that we'll go to lecture number 5, Bank Supervision Department. Now, and also there's another thing. I may be doing like this. When it comes to Bank Supervision Department, the term itself gives us a sense, because the banks are financial intermediaries. Banks are in the financial system. Central bank has the responsibility of maintaining financial system stability. Then when we read this name, Bank Supervision Department, we should get a sense, okay, this should be related to central bank responsibility of maintaining financial system stability. Then there should be another question to raise. Actually, under my videos, I could not discuss like this, because now I feel that you are there listening to me. Then why should we supervise the banks? That again we know, because as I have discussed in the earlier lectures also, banks are living with others' money, because they are financial intermediaries. And also the bank's benefit will depend on the profits. And their lending operations generate income, they have to pay for deposit liabilities. Therefore, naturally, since all these institutions are handled by people, humans, there's a natural tendency of them working towards their own benefits, sometimes sacrificing the benefits of the depositors. Therefore, somebody has to be there as the policeman to supervise what they do. Okay, central bank does it. So the Bank Supervision Department is the authority to discharge that function on behalf of the central bank. We call it DBS. Director Bank Supervision is a very powerful figure. It has the control over all the banks, their management, and also supervise, monitor, and also take actions from time to time. We have the responsibility. Let's look at what they do under that. Develop a new methodology for on-site examination to strengthen risk-based supervision. When it comes to this, we know that banks conduct on-site supervision and off-site supervision. On-site supervision means they visit the banks and check their financial operations, interview the officers, and check whether they are following due diligence regarding the financial operations. And also, purpose is risk-based supervision. We know that banking operations have so many different risks: credit risk, operational risk, market risk, interest rate risk. There are different dimensions of risk. And if the bank management does not look at all those integrated risk aspects of their operations, sometimes they can naturally lead to head towards a crisis situation. which will jeopardize the stability of the entire financial system. Therefore, from time to time, bank supervision department develop methods, because reason is this: banks are very dynamic. Financial system itself is a very dynamic system as a sector. Therefore, from time to time, different problems can arise. Different unforeseen developments can arise in the banking sector. Therefore, to capture those things, they have to develop methodology, because sometimes the methods that they use in the past may not be useful now. Now, if you look at very carefully, when it came to bank operations, there was Basel I, Basel II, now Basel III. So that means from time to time, depending on the developments, both locally and internationally, different methods have to come. Different methods have to be adopted. The bank supervision department does it. The second one, strengthen the continuous supervision function of the FinNet system. This is financial network. Now we know that now gradually the banking sector is moving towards virtual banking. Even now, especially during this coronavirus period, people were using more this online systems. Even now you can see earlier we were meeting, the lecturers and the students were meeting at the IBSL towers. Now we are not meeting physically. Now we are meeting online. Likewise, in the banking, the financial system also, people started using more financial services. So the financial transaction can be a little bit more complex compared to earlier. Then that also has to be supervised. Review and amend relevant acts and regulations in line with the current market developments and international best practices. Again, somewhat similar to what we discussed, because they sometimes when the new developments emerge, old rules may not be relevant. Sometimes they have to be amended. Sometimes new rules have to be introduced. So Bank Supervision Department, or the Director of Bank Supervision, DBS, is responsible for that. And others are, I think, straightforward. Comply with international standards and best practices. This Basel things are there. And you know that International Bank for Settlement, I don't remember. International banks for supervision, something like that. So then they also from time to time introduce new practices and also rules and regulations. I will remember the name. Then promote market-driven consolidation. Banking consolidation is another area, because in a small country like Sri Lanka, they argue having so many small type of banks and financial institutions like finance companies is exposing the system to more risk. Therefore, it is, if they consolidate, merge or acquisitions, through merge or acquisition, if they form a bigger organization with a higher capital base, strong capital base, they can improve the resilience. Resilience is capacity to absorb any local or international shocks. Then sometimes, if the market development suggests so, Bank Supervision Department can also facilitate for the banks to merge or acquire other small banks on mutual understanding. That is what is called promote market-driven consolidation of FIs, financial institutions. That can be especially this one for banks. And next slide, we will discuss about non-bank financial supervision department. That is a very small one compared to the bank supervision department. So we are not going to focus more on that. When we understand the banks one, otherwise also we can understand clearly. Promote crisis preparedness and find new strategic partners. This is again, if a particular bank's operations, if the bank supervision department starts, we can say sense feeling, or starts feeling or sense emerging crisis with respect to a particular one bank or few banks, then the bank supervision department has the responsibility of taking precautionary actions. In the first round, they can advise the management and also impose certain rules and conditions. Sometimes they can even appoint a different management for that. Strategic partners, new strategic partners, just to make sure that the bank comes out of the crisis situation and also move smoothly in line with other institutions so that the financial system stability will be secured. Then formulate national financial inclusion strategy. This is another area. Financial inclusion means now if you go to rural areas, even in the urban areas, sometimes you may find people who are meeting their financial requirements not through banks or not through established financial institutions, but through other means, informal ones. Maybe money lenders, T2 systems, and all those things are there. So then, and also there are so many different types of schemes where the innocent people, innocence in the sense who do not know that much about the formal financial sector, can fall prey into those people. Therefore, financial inclusion means you get as many people as possible to the formal financial sector. For that to happen, there should be continuous communication between the banks and the society, and also they should provide awareness programs, make the activities more customer friendly, so that whatever the phobia people have will gradually evade over time. Now, when we go to the rural areas, sometimes people are a little bit reluctant to go to the banks because they think their formalities are not comfortable for them. If a particular banks, when a poor in the sense with poor knowledge in the banking sector, if a person like that go to a bank branch, if the environment in the bank branch is not customer friendly, if the officers deal with customers like bosses, then naturally people become reluctant to come to visit those places. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the bank supervision department to advise and also coordinate with banks to create an environment where more people feel comfortable of visiting banks and get engaged in those banks with their financial requirements. Then strengthen communication with banks, auditors. These are just straightforward. Then the last one is providing training and developmental staff assist capacity building in the financial sector. Central Bank conducts programs continuously for the bank officers regarding the new developments in the banking sector and also new rules and regulations they introduce, make them familiar with that. So that is the role of the bank supervision department. Now let's go to the other department, public debt department. Public debt, we know now in the earlier discussions, we introduced two different responsibilities of the central bank. That is core responsibilities and agency responsibilities. Therefore, we discussed about core functions and agency functions. Actually, and also we clarified agency functions are the functions that any organization can perform. There is no need for the central bank to do it. But if the government entrusts the central bank with that responsibility, on behalf of the government, central bank can perform it. So the public debt department or the public debt management is such a function. Public debt department takes over that responsibility to perform that function on behalf of the government. And the public debt department is responsible for two important things actually. One is to raise funds at the lowest possible cost for the government, because we know the concept of public debt comes with government borrowing. Government borrowing comes with the concept of government borrowing comes with the government running a budget deficit. If the government runs a budget deficit, and deficit has to be financed, and the only way, main source of doing that is borrowing, then handling that borrowing part, and also once you borrow, then debt accumulates. Borrowing has to be managed. Public debt also has to be managed. The public debt department does those two functions: raising funds at the lowest possible cost to meet the financial requirements of the government, and also repayment of loans in time, both the principal and interest, both domestic and international loans, and managing it the most efficient way. Otherwise, we know that if a loan, if the government fails to honor the debt obligation, even one single payment can make the debtor declare the country as bankrupt. So that has a very high reputational risk, very, very high reputational risk. And also you may have, you may be familiar with the sovereign debt concept. Sovereign debt means the risk-free debt. Sovereign means that. Sovereign means gold. Gold is pure. If the gold is pure, gold is accepted everywhere. That's risk-free asset. The same way, if a government borrows, that government borrowing is considered as sovereign debt, because the likelihood of the government defaulting, repaying that loan is very, very, very low. That's why. But again, we know, if you have read the international information, again, there is a concept called sovereign debt problem. Even the governments can fail to pay debt. Recently, Greece was in a situation like that. And there are some other countries also they are heading towards, but sometimes they can manage with the help of international organizations like IMF and also the countries. Therefore, managing public debt is a very, very sensitive, highly sensitive subject. That may be the reason for the government to hand that over and that responsibility over to the central bank. Okay, let's look at what they do under that. Coordinate with the government treasury with respect to the government borrowing requirements with the projected time frame. Here, you may have studied by now under economics, macroeconomic part of economics, when the government approves the budget, when the cabinet approves the budget in parliament with the majority of votes, it approves three things actually. Approval is for the revenue program. Approval is for the expenditure program. If the revenue is less than the expenditure, then there should be borrowing. There should be borrowing programs as well. So when the budget is approved, it approves, because we know that the budget of the government is presented for a future year. That's for the next year. They all are estimates. Sometimes estimates may not be realized. Therefore, that has to be approved. Okay, do this slide. Then the revenue estimates are approved, expenditure estimates are approved. If the government runs into a budget deficit and requiring the government to borrow, that borrowing program is also approved. So the borrowing part is handled by the government treasury. Therefore, if the central bank is going to be the fiscal agent for the government, and if the public debt department is the responsible authority in the central bank to do that function, it has to continuously coordinate with the government treasury. And here one important point is the projected time frame. The coordinate with the government treasury with respect to the government borrowing requirements with the projected time frame. Because suppose that the government is going to borrow for the entire period of 2020, let's say 50 billion rupees. Government treasury may not need that 50 billion at one point. Maybe it can be spread throughout the year depending on the government cash flow. Now, if the tax collection is coming like a peak, suppose that the tax collection coming in March, again June, September, December, like, so there's a peak. Sometimes government expenditure programs also can have peaks like that. Then in certain months, government revenue could be higher than the expected expenditure. In that case, government does not need to borrow. But in certain months, government expenditure may be higher than the income. In that case, they need to borrow. Likewise, depending on the projected cash flow for the government, both from the income side, revenue side, and expenditure side, the Treasury Department, they have a special department, the debt management department. Under Treasury, there's a debt management department. They manage debt. And they have a program, when to borrow, how much to borrow, like that. That is communicated to the Public Debt Department to make arrangements to borrow. Then conduct auctions of treasury bills and treasury bonds by calling bids from registered primary dealers. We know that treasury bills and bonds are the borrowing instruments of the government. Central bank issues them on behalf of the government. And again, we know, you may have studied by now under Survey of Financial Systems. Treasury bills are short-term instruments and treasury bonds are long-term instruments. They are not directly issued to the investors, because now earlier in the early days they were simply distributed through bids, accepting bids directly from the investors. But now, since the market has expanded and the volume of borrowing has expanded, a small system like that cannot handle. Therefore, this primary dealer system has been established. Primary dealers are the intermediaries of government debt instruments. The central bank conduct auctions. When you say central bank, Public Debt Department conduct auctions. These primary dealers can bid. Those are confidential bids. They can bid volumes and also the prices. Then once the bids are open, depending on the requirement of funds on that day, and also depending on the bids offered, they can, after opening the bids, they can, through the conduct of auctions, they can accept at different levels. So this Public Debt Department does that. That's what the second one says: analyze the bids and accept suitable bids to meet the requirements and lowest possible cost. Make due payments of debt liabilities in the form of principal amounts and the interest. Those are straightforward. We don't have to spend that much time on that. Analyze public debt profile and submit findings to the Monetary Board and other relevant parties for decision making. This is very, very important. Now, if somebody borrows, if the borrower does not analyze its profile, sometimes they can head towards a crisis. Now, here the government is borrowing. Now, the nature of the government agencies is, as long as they get the money, they take it a little bit easy. Then there should be someone to analyze the situation and also issue warnings. If we go like this now, same way that now, if at the banks, you may be doing the same for your customers. If a particular customer is defaulting and likely to default, you issue warnings. Okay, you have to pay, you are due this many installments, and also, and these are your conditions. And if you don't pay, if you comply with these requirements, you will find these problems, like you can do it. The same way, if the Public Debt Department is managing the public debt on behalf of the government, and if the numbers indicate a particular emerging crisis in the future, it is the responsibility of the Public Debt Department to analyze it and submit their findings to the Monetary Board. Earlier we discussed, Monetary Board is the supreme body of the central bank, taking all the decisions. And also, Monetary Board has one member coming from the government directly, secretary to the Ministry of Finance. He's a permanent member, ex officio. And when those findings, Public Debt Department's findings, are submitted to the Monetary Board, they are available for both the chairman, the governor, and also Treasury Secretary and other members. So then it is, and again, we have to combine this with the central bank's responsibility of advising the government, economic advisor, accordingly, depending on the assessment of the monetary board members, based on the information provided by the public debt department, they can take actions and also communicate those actions and also suggestions and to the Ministry of Finance for the implementation purposes. Then the other one is take measures to enhance the safety of the investors in government securities. This is also a very important point, you know, because these primary dealers are the intermediaries again. Primary dealers are appointed by the public debt departments, superintendent of the public debt, and so there are rules and regulations for them to follow. Sometimes they can manipulate the facilities available for them because they can have hidden operations sometimes just to make money. Rather than doing their main business, they can do their own business. Their main business is to play as the intermediaries, but sometimes they can make investment through different ways. These days, if you are familiar with the latest then available information about these areas, you can find there are possibilities of these primary dealers working towards their own interest, putting the interest of the real owners of funds at risk. There are examples from the recent past. Even now, those things are being discussed. We are not going to discuss those things here, but you can have a sense that if there is no proper supervisory and regulatory system to monitor the operations of primary dealers, there can be some irregularities in their activities, finally lead into problems in the entire financial system. So public debt department has to analyze and also supervise those behaviors as well. Then the last one, design and revise rules and regulations related to public debt management. Again, this one is, as I said earlier, for the bank supervision part also, because an economy is a dynamic one. From time to time, situations change. Now, if we take February of this year and March this year, in March, something that the whole world did not expect happened, the COVID-19. Then you cannot handle the situation under this unexpected environment with the old rules. Sometimes you have to change your rules and regulations the same way. If the public debt dimensions are also changing, then the new rules are required to manage the situation. Okay, that's the last one. Then let's go to Payments and Settlements Department, PSD. I would like to take you a little bit towards the past lectures. Remember we said, especially relating to, I hope by now you have read all the notes that I have prepared for you in the text form, and also all PowerPoint presentations I sent you, and also the videos that you may have access up to now. You may remember the mission statement of Bundesbank. Mission statement of Bundesbank and also other banks. Payment and settlement, providing a secure and efficient payment and settlement system is also a responsibility of the central bank. We know in the current context of very dynamic and sophisticated operational system, not only the banking system as well as in other areas. If you take the primitive, again, let me guess, you may have studied about the barter economy, maybe under again survey of financial systems that should have been handled. In a primitive payment and settlement system, barter economies, you exchange goods for goods. Payment and settlement takes place at the same time. And with cash also, if you make a payment with the cash, you just pay the cash with the cash and the transaction is over. But when it comes to banking system, if a person pays with a check, until the check is cleared, the transaction is not complete. Payment is done, but the settlement is not there. It takes some time for the settlement to take place. And if you pay with a credit card, the payment and settlement between the buyer and the seller is settled, but another transaction is open between the credit card issuer and the credit card holder. Then there should be another arrangement. Until such time the payment for the credit issuer is also settled, the transaction is not complete. Likewise, there are so many different ways of paying and settling. And important thing is this: when you make the payment physically, it is visible. But when you use a system, it is not visible. Sometimes people are little bit concerned about once they make a payment, let's say with a credit card. Once they make with a credit card, sometimes, and also this with international travel, sometimes people are advised not to use credit card in certain countries and certain places, because they can steal the information from the credit card and also make fraudulent transactions using that information. Therefore, if a payment and settlement is to be secure and safe, then there are rules and regulations to be implemented. Again, I would like to talk a little bit about the role of the payment and settlement system. Now, imagine, now you all must be working in bank or other financial institutions. On a day, if your systems goes off, just for 5 minutes, if the system goes off for 5 minutes, what will happen? All the payments and settlement transactions are held up. That means it should be efficient, and also if a system facilitates fraudulent activities, then people gradually start feeling that it is not secure. Then they start leaving it. Then what will happen? Payment and settlements get stagnated, and they become inefficient. You may not remember, because now in the early days, it took around 7 days for a check from a regional rural areas to be cleared after writing a check. It was 7 days. Now it is, I think, 2+1 or something. There is now this trunk imaging systems, and there were so many things now. There are so many things now, but those days they were not there. So it took some time. People had to wait until the funds are credited to their respective accounts for them to execute another transaction. But now the system is not like that. Therefore, if the payment and settlement system is efficient and secure, people comfortably use them, then the economic activities also become very efficient. When the activities are efficient, that naturally promotes productivity. Productivity again helps the sustainable growth. That is how it happens. Let's go to the last one. Employees Provident Fund Department. This again is, now there's a little bit of a mistake. I'm sorry for that. Employees, then there are double Y's. It should be double E's actually. I'm sorry for that. You may correct it. Employees Provident Fund Department, EPF department. Again, we know, similar to the Public Debt Department, managing the Employees Provident Fund is also not a core function of the central bank. It is an agency function. But anyway, the government has entrusted the central bank with that responsibility. Employees Provident Fund Department is the responsible authority in discharging that function. Those are not that complicated. Let's look at their functions. In the slides, information is straightforward. EPFD also performs agency, it is there, coordinate with Secretary of Labor on matters related to EPF. Here, we have to be a little bit clear about this situation, because now the fund is owned by the members. Employees Provident Fund is for the private sector, formal private sector employees who do not have a pension schemes. This is a superannuation scheme to look after the interest of those people who, when they reach the retirement age. That's why only at the retirement you get the funds released. There are rules and regulations there. It is just to ensure that these people at their late days will not have financial problems. That is the purpose. Therefore, owners of the funds are formal private sector employees, but the administrative part is by the Labor Department, actually Labor Secretariat. Labor Minister of Labor is the authority from the government side. Labor Secretariat is operating under Minister of Labor. Then the EPF department has to continuously coordinate with them. Why? Because EPF department of the central bank was only a manager of it's a fund manager, only a fund manager. Now, what is the role of fund manager? Collection of contributions, investing them on secure investments, and release funds for the beneficiaries when they reach the time to enjoy that facility. That's what they do. All the administrative part is done by the Labor Secretariat. Then other functions are register members on the instructions of Labor Secretary of Labor and maintain accounts on their behalf. It's like a bank. So they maintain accounts, collect funds, and release funds, and also invest the funds and also credit the respective accounts with the due interest and other benefits. That's what they do. Collect due contribution from employees and employers, and up to date. Contribution from employees went back. It should be employers only, and update the relevant accounts. Please correct that in your slides. Even here we can do, but to save time, we will move. Manage the fund to earn maximum benefits to the members at an acceptable level of risk, because we know financial investment is not an easy thing. Why? Because higher the return, higher the risk. Risk and return are positively related. If you want to get higher returns, you have to expose yourself to high risk. But since you are not the fund owner of the fund, EPF department has to be concerned about the acceptable level of risk. Of course, you cannot have a zero risk investment. Nowhere in the world you can find a zero risk investment. There can be different risk dimensions. But EPF department, in consultation with the Minister of Labor, can come to a particular level, can have an understanding about the particular level of risk they are going to live with when making investment of the funds in different assets. So they have to do it. Release the benefits on behalf of the members as per the instructions of the Labor Secretary. Now, once a member is about to retire, for the central bank for the EPF department to release funds, the instructions should come from the Labor Secretary. Until such time, EPF department can't do anything. So it should be under instructions of Labor Secretary. Collect and provide data to relevant department. It's simple. They collect data and conduct programs to enhance public awareness on benefits of the fund and expand its member base. Sometimes employees, especially the small uneducated people working in informal organizations, they don't know their labor rights. Sometimes both employer and employee don't know the labor rights. But according to the labor rules, even a single employee should be getting his employee EPF contribution. Those are the requirements. Then it is the responsibility of the EPF department and also the Labor Secretariat to educate the people about their rights, and employers about their responsibilities to look after the interest of the employees, and employees about their rights. When they work, they also are entitled for certain sacrifices coming from the employee side. That's why even in the bank, we know when we work, part of the fund is coming from our salary. The balance part is coming from the employer's part. So we have a right. And also there should be a contribution by the employee as well. That's how the fund is raised. Then upgrade the management system of EPF to improve efficiency from, and those are simple because as I said earlier, now if the financial system is changing, if the payment and settlement systems are changing, even the EPF department can't stick to the outdated payment and settlement system. They also have to adjust accordingly. For that, there should be upgrading systems. Those are the ones. Okay, now our lecture number 4 is over. Here what we did was, actually up to now we simply look at the responsibilities of the central bank, functions related. Earlier in the first lecture we discussed about the importance of a central bank, why a nation needs a central bank. Then we discussed about responsibilities of a central bank under different dimensions. Then we talk about the functions of a central bank related to those responsibilities. They all were, taking central bank as an institution. But central bank is not just an institution. For it to discharge all those responsibilities to perform all those functions, there is a very well-established structure. That's what we discussed up to now. Under the operational structure, there are departments. Under the management structure, we discuss about the monetary board and the monetary board members and all those. Okay, now starting from this lecture, we are going to shift to lecture number 5. This is where real central bank is going to start. Now, up to now, what we have done is we have simply introduced the organization called central bank, which is the apex body of the financial system in any country, not only in Sri Lanka, in any country. That's what we did. Now we are going to look at the discussion from here, this point onwards will be more general, because all these functions that we discussed up to now were based on the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Because we should be familiar with the central bank here in this country, because they are more important for us than others, because there are specific functions that central banks in each country performs depending on their rules and regulations and the government thinking. Now we are going to shift to central bank balance sheet. Again, let me ask, our members are very silent. Let me ask whether they have received, we have six members, I see. At least one is more than enough. Gerald, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
There was another one. Can you all hear me? Yes, no? Okay. Have you received the PowerPoint presentation for lecture number 5? Central bank balance sheet?
Yes, we
Gayumi? Hello, Gayumi, have you received? Okay. Okay. Now let's start with that one. Oh, sorry. Okay. Central bank balance sheet. Now, central bank balance sheet is actually the mirror. Or we can't say it is not mirror, it is the dashboard. Because by looking at the central bank balance sheet, we can understand the nature of the financial operation the central bank has been having, and also possible outcomes to come in the future. Right away, we can't do that by simply by looking at. We have to collect the data for a time series situation and look at how the things are gradually evolving. Now we are going to introduce the balance sheet of the central bank to you, and also then after that, look at how the operations of the central bank are reflected in the balance sheet. Because central bank has so many different operations. Now we discussed in the earlier lectures, central bank can lend to the government. Central bank can lend to the banks for the short-term period. Central bank also can conduct open market operations. Those things we will discuss later. Central bank can engage in the domestic foreign exchange market to stabilize the market, stabilize the exchange rate, either by buying or selling. Those are the central bank operations, especially financial operations. Then when central bank does that, how they are reflected in the central bank balance sheet, we can understand. Let's look at it. Here we have it. Simplified balance sheet of the central bank. Now this can be applied to any central bank. In the annual report, of the central bank, you can find information related to this. All the information is there. Let's look at the liability side and asset side. On the liability side, currency held by the public. Okay, now we are holding currency. Gerald and Piumi and all other participants here may be having money in their pockets. Possibly they are at home, or even at home you should be having money. When you go to office tomorrow, the first thing that you take before leaving home is your pocket. Why? And also we sometimes ask our children when they go to school, did you take your money? Why? Because it provides an asset feeling to the holder. If we have 100 rupees, you think, okay, you can buy goods and services to the tune of 100 rupees. If you have 100,000 rupees, we feel more capable of having a command situation in the market. Actually, the purchasing power in economics is a very nice term. If you have money, you have a commanding power in the market. Why it is commanding power? You can say, okay, what is the price of this? 100 rupees. Okay, then you give me, I'll buy it at 100 rupees. Somebody can say, no, 200 rupees. Okay, even I buy it. That means you have the commanding power. You can do it. You can say, okay, whether it is 100 rupees or 200 rupees, 500 rupees, okay, I'm willing to pay because I want this. Then you are expressing a commanding position in the market there. That is only possible if you have the paying capacity. One way of the prime way of expressing your paying capacity is having liquidity in your pocket. The 100% liquid asset is cash. So that's why when we are leaving home, we don't forget to take the pocket with us. That means we have an asset feeling. Okay, we know any financial asset has a liability side. It has two sides of the same coin. When we have a treasury bill holder, for the holder, it is an asset. For the issuer, the government, it is a liability. For a debenture holder, it's an asset. For the issuer, the company or whatever, it is a liability. It's like that. Then here, central bank has the liability to the currency that we are holding. Currency held by public. What? Then it has a little bit of a uncomfortable feeling when you say, okay, what liability does the central bank has on us when we are holding currency? Therefore, this liability is a very special liability called sight liability. It is a sight liability, S-I-G-H-T, sight liability. Single quote, I'm sorry, I don't know Tamil. Drushya wagakim. Drushya, dakka gamaning wagakim penannu. Sight liability. It is like this. if you go to the, suppose that you are holding 1,000 rupee note, suppose it get damaged by mistake, of course, by accident, it get damaged. Then if you go to the central bank and hand this over and convince them that you did not do it purposely, if that's a genuine currency note, the currency department of the central bank has the responsibility of paying that amount to you by receiving that damaged note. And also, if you are holding 5,000 rupees, if you think, okay, I don't want 5,000 rupee note, but I want 2,000 rupee notes and also another 500 rupee notes and the balance in 100 rupees, then you can go to the currency department and ask for the same denomination, but same denomination, same value, 5,000 rupee value in different denominations. And currency department functions are a little bit more complicated in that regard, but I'm not going to discuss those things. It is not relevant here. It is central bank does, currency department does each and everything possible to honor the value of a currency note if it is issued by the central bank. Of course, for fake currencies, counterfeit notes, you can't do that. Even a half-burned currency note, you can take the central bank currency department and claim for the due value. It's like that. Why does the central bank do it? Central bank does it because people use currency based on the trust it has on the issuer. Otherwise, this currency note is just a piece of paper. No, it's a piece of cloth, actually. It's not a piece of paper, it's a piece of cloth. Maybe the cost of printing a 5,000 rupee note may be less than 100. Then the balance value of the currency note is just the legal acceptance of the government, so it is represented the government. Since people have trust in the issuer and also the responsible authority behind that, responsible authority is because now if you take time to read the currency note, it says the currency note issued on behalf of the Sri Lankan government, another long way, is valid to execute any transaction within Sri Lanka. It is a legal authority that the currency note is representing. So people have trust. Therefore, to secure that trust, central bank has to take actions. That is the SAIC liability. Then the second one is currency held by commercial banks. Currency held by commercial banks. Okay, what is the purpose of central banks holding, commercial banks holding currency with the central bank? That we know. By now, you may have studied about commercial banks and financial intermediaries, and there are so many things. Because even at the certificate level, there are courses where they talk about commercial banking and the survey of financial system. So you should know it. We know that. For prudential purposes, according to the Banking Act, for the prudential purposes, the commercial banks are required to keep a fraction of their deposit liabilities with the central bank. We know that any deposit of a commercial bank or any financial institution taking deposits are liabilities. We don't simply say in the banking jargon, in the financial sector jargon, we don't say deposits. General public may call them deposit, but we always call them deposit liabilities because each and every deposit is a liability of the deposit taker. In this case, commercial banks. Commercial bank is their liability. Then, as I said earlier also, commercial banks can tend to lend to risky businesses at high interest rates so that they can earn higher income. And we know the income surplus of a commercial bank is the interest income and interest expenditure. You pay interest on deposits, liabilities, and you charge interest on loans. Any margin is the profit. Therefore, if you are paying 6% on your deposits, if you have two projects to lend, one project at 15%, another project at 18%, it is profitable to lend at 18% because you have additional 3% interest income then your profit will increase by that much. But the problem is, in the financial world, there is a concept called high the risk, high the return. High the return, high the risk. So when you are trying to earn high interest, there can be also high risk. It is not the risk that is finally going to be borne by you. It is going to be borne by the depositors, who are the real owners of funds. Therefore, there should be a policeman. Policeman is the central bank. Policeman impose conditions. Okay, you cannot lend every cent that you collect as deposit liabilities. Fraction of that has to be kept with the central bank under prudential purposes. That is a statutory reserve requirement. Then once commercial banks deposit that money with the central bank, it is the central bank liability. Because whenever commercial banks ask for under due regulations, when the commercial banks ask for money back, central bank has to honor that. Then that is a central bank liability. Then deposit of commercial banks. Here, I'm sorry. Deposit of commercial, these RR means required reserves. In addition to that, commercial banks also can hold money with the central bank for transaction purposes. Both are same. Like required reserves, deposit, that is deposit of commercial banks. That is RR means required reserves. According to the statutory reserve requirement, commercial banks can hold currency for the transaction purposes. It's like this. Again, when commercial banks have settlements between them, some settlements are direct, some settlements are through the central bank currency department. So then they have to deposit money with the central bank. If any one of you are working in the cash department of your bank, you know that domestic operations department give instructions. You deal with the domestic operations department to credit and debit accounts, and there will be corresponding transaction with the currency department. Then if a particular bank has to make a payment to another bank, if it is going through the currency department, that particular bank has to deposit money with the currency department until such time that money is owned by that bank. It is going to be the liability of the central bank. Required reserve means under prudential purposes they have to keep it. I'm sorry for the confusion. It's a matter of just shifting items. Okay. Deposit of other institutions. This is a very rare item. Sometimes some organization can keep deposit with the central bank under special circumstances, but since that is possible, we have put it there. And also, this is not only related to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, but for other banks also, other central bank also, this can be relevant. Then the government deposits. Those days we used to have in the central bank the Government Accounts Department, GAB, Government Accounts Department. Even now, there are accounts maintained by the government, because the central bank also functions as the banker to the government. Banker to the government. The same way a customer open an account with a commercial bank or any other bank for its transactions, it can deposit, can make the payments. Government also can maintain deposit with the central bank for interdepartmental payments. So if there are deposits of those organizations, government departments or agencies with the central bank, there is going to be a liability of the central bank. Then the government borrowings, so foreign borrowings. Central banks from time to time can borrow from the IMF, World Bank, not World Bank, IMF and similar organization for the short-term financial requirements. Other liabilities are very small ones. Those are negligible, but there can be liabilities which are not going to fall into any of the above categories. That's why we have put, actually not me, that's why there's an item like other liabilities. So what are the assets? Assets to commercial, advances to commercial banks. There are deposit currency held by commercial bank with the central bank. There's a liability, and at the same time, central bank can give advances to commercial banks. You know that through the day-to-day operations, through day-to-day operations of commercial banks, sometimes commercial banks run into shortages. Here, even though it is going to come a little late, let me introduce one concept. We touched this little bit in the earlier slides also, earlier discussions also. Central bank maintains two facilities. That is standing deposit facility and standing lending facility. Standing means it is available there. Deposit facility means at the end of the day, because we know that commercial banks have daily financial operations, cash flow in, cash flow out. At the end of the day, there can be three different situations. Either bank can be having a surplus, or a deficit, or balance. Then if there's a surplus, it is not financially advisable for any organization to keep that money idle even for a night. Because overnight, if there are facilities available, even overnight, you can lend it and earn some interest. Maybe interest earn, maybe rate may be very marginal. Because if it is, let's say, let's say as at now it is I think 4.3% or something deposit rate, then that is per annum. Per day it may be marginal, but if the volume is huge, if the volumes are millions, then you can have a substantial amount of interest earned just overnight. Therefore, you can't leave cash like that. You have to make deposits. The central bank has provided the facility for commercial banks to manage their short-term liquidity. Let me emphasize it. It is to manage short-term liquidity. Short-term means the shortest time term is overnight. This evening you can deposit, tomorrow morning you can take it back. Just overnight. The same way, if commercial banks run out of cash, if their cash outflow is higher than the cash inflow, then they end up with a deficit situation at the end of the day. Then they have to somehow fill the gap. Then they can go to the central bank and borrow from central bank standing lending facility, and the lending facility rate as at now it is I think 5.5%. Earlier there were higher rates. Now gradually over the last many weeks, if not months, there have been a gradual reduction of policy interest rate. Those things we will discuss under central bank operations in recent times. We will discuss those things in detail. Here the point is commercial banks can borrow from central bank can lend to commercial banks. Okay. Credit to the government. The government is central bank is the permanent source for the government to borrow. According to the Monetary Law Act, central bank is bound to lend to the government to the extent of 10% of the estimated government revenue for a particular year. There's a requirement actually. For example, let's say if the government's estimated revenue for the year 2020 is, let's say, 1 billion, or let's say 10 billion. Let's say 10 billion. That is the estimated, that is not the actual realized in revenue, it is the estimated revenue. We know that budget estimate for 2021 will be presented in November 2020. The same way, the budget for 2020 was presented in November 2000 and there was no budget, I think. But anyway, practically under normal circumstances, it is the month of in November that the budget for the next year is presented. So then the budget revenue to start with in 2020 or any other year is the estimated revenue. Therefore, the government can borrow, according to the Monetary Law Act, the government can borrow, in this case, if the revenue is 10 billion, 10% of that is 1 billion, government can borrow 1 billion from the central bank. Earlier practice was there were rupee loans, something called rupee loans, but now that practice has gradually gone down. What happens is central bank can purchase treasury bills to the tune of 1 billion and it will be holdings of the central bank, central bank's holdings of government debt securities, and money will go to the central bank. So that's an asset, because now once the central bank holds 1 billion worth of treasury bills, that becomes an asset to the central bank. It will be a liability to the government, because government is required to pay it back with due interest. Then international reserves. We know that earlier also we discussed, central bank is the custodian of the country's international reserves. So central bank is holding it, and then in the central bank balance sheet, it is an asset, and there can be other assets, buildings, vehicles, machines, equipment, and like that. There can be ones, but those are not that important. Now you may understand different components on the liability side of the central bank balance sheet, and also different components in the asset side of the central bank balance sheet. And important thing is this. All these functions, all these components are related to different functions of the central bank. And it is really interesting. It is really interesting for someone to study these things and see how all these links are there, how all these are linked. There is a subject called financial programming. Financial programming analyzes how the financial flows move through all the sectors of the economy: central bank, banking sector, government sector, external sector, household sector, how all these are flowing. If you can just imagine, just close your eyes and imagine how many telephone line connections, internet connections are around us. If you switch on a telephone and punch a number, you will be connected to the particular one. That means all the waves are around us. Internet waves and telephone wave. There are so many different waves. The same way, the central bank and the financial systems are connected in a very, very complicated, very complex network. Then if we can start feeling, if you can develop your senses as a financial person, if something happens somewhere, how will that be reflected in another part of the financial system or even the non-financial system? It is really interesting. Central bank balance sheet gives us some kind of a guidance to understand that, not at a glance, but if you analyze these central bank balance sheet positions over time, maybe if you want to have get really good sense, maybe 15-20 years, like we have to do it for self-interest. Okay, then let's go to the next slide related to this. It's a simply matter of we know that according to accounting principles, assets should be equal to liabilities. So what I have done is simply putting the liability side on one side and the assets on other side. And also there are, now if you take this simply, this advances to banks are on the asset side, deposits of banks with the central bank also on the asset liability side. This is also liability of the central bank to commercial banks. This is liability, asset of the central bank with commercial banks. So there should be a net situation. Again, here we can see the government deposits is a liability, and also the central bank has given loans to the government. It is an asset. So you can take the net position. Again, you can get borrowing abroad. All these are in foreign exchange terms. That is on the liability side. But when you go here, you can see international reserves. That is on the asset side. You can take a net position. Likewise, if you combine assets and liabilities together, pluses and minuses will cancel out. Finally, you will end up with the net situation. That is exactly what we have done in this slide. Leisurely, you can go through all these things finally, but I want to come to this point. Finally, all these things can be summarized to come to this equation. That is very, very important. What is this? Currency held by public. Currency held by public. This required reserves held by the banking system with the central bank. This is in cash. This is in cash. What are these? These are actually, this should be net. Net lending to commercial banks, net domestic assets. The only domestic asset in this case is the holdings of domestic assets. We did not take the private sector debentures or anything related to the central bank. Only assets we saw was domestic assets. Domestic assets were related to the government borrowing. So this net domestic assets reflect how much the central bank has lent to the government. Net foreign assets, again, the same. How much foreign exchange, central bank, not only the foreign exchange, actually. There can be foreign exchange denominated other assets, and also even gold. Even gold can be on this side, but they all are net. Net other assets. Here also it should be net. Net advances too, because there can be deposits. We have to, can you please correct this one also? Net assets to commercial banks. Net advances to commercial banks. Sorry, net advances to commercial banks. What are these? Central bank is lending. When the central bank lend, money goes out. Here, central bank is again lending, money goes out. Central bank is accumulating assets, money goes out. And central bank is acquiring other assets, money goes out. What is this? Required reserves, money comes in. CP is money is not with the central bank, but there's a liability related to the central bank. Right? Okay, if this is net advances, asset. Net lending to the government, asset. Net foreign exchange, asset. Net other asset, all are assets. These are the sources. These are the sources. They are the use. When the money goes out, people can hold it. That is one way of using money. Commercial banks can use it, and they can keep reserves with the central bank. Now, this leads to a very interesting question. Hope that you understand the credit creation process of the banking system. Credit creation process of the banking system. There we understand there is what is called monetary base. Monetary base. Monetary base is the foundations that enables commercial banks to create credit. Monetary base. Okay, then monetary base has another term. Monetary base is, I think I have put it somewhere. Monetary base is the site. Monetary base is the liability of the central bank. All the liability of the central bank is called monetary base. Now you can see currency held by public is a liability of the central bank. Reserves that the central bank is holding on behalf of commercial banks is also a liability. So these two components are liability. This is the monetary base. And this is how the money is used. Uses of monetary base. This part is sources. Okay, for the money to go out, this one component contributing. Again, this one is contributing for the money to go out from the central bank. All these are like that. So these are the sources of currency going out of the central bank. This is the way that they are representing central bank liability. Therefore, this side is called uses of monetary base. This side is called sources of monetary base. And the title of the slide is also that uses and sources of the monetary base. Okay. Now, let's look at the main sources in little bit of a detail. Acquisition of assets. When the central bank acquired assets, when the central bank acquires assets, then the central bank has to make the payment in domestic currency, and central bank is the monopoly authority. Central bank is the monopoly which has the legal authority to print money and issue. Then what happens is, now, for example, let's take a little bit of a different example. Now, if the government makes a payment, government does not print money. Central bank prints money. Then the government has to have money collected through taxes or fees or other charges. Then when the central bank, when the government collects taxes, suppose that the government collects 1,000 rupees as taxes, somebody has to pay that tax. Then if you take the economy like this, 1,000 rupees is people, taxpayers, this is the government. When the government get 1,000 rupees tax revenue, the government revenue goes up, taxpayers amount goes down. Finally, they cancel out. There's no addition. 100 rupees increase, 100 rupees decrease, finally, zero balance. But the story is a little bit different when it comes to central bank. Central bank can simply open the vault, just open the vault and pay with the cash available in the vault. So that vault is getting money from the print. Print is simply taking printing material and print money. It is just a piece of cloth with the printed letters and all those things. But when it comes to the central bank, that is still. And also you may understand, money within the central bank is not money. Money within the central bank is not money. Why? Because central bank is the issuer, central bank is also the holder. It's somewhat similar to you writing a promissory note. If you write a promissory note, the person who is in possession of this one will entitle to get 1,000 rupees from me. If you give it to somebody else, that person will have a claim for 1,000 rupees from you. But if you write it and keep your own pocket, you are the issuer, you are the holder. Nothing happens. The same way, if the central bank prints money and keeps it in its vaults, there is no money supply. It is just the stock of currency in the form of just pieces of printed material. That's all. But at the point when a currency note or a coin leaves the central bank premises, and when it goes to another person's hand, it becomes that person's asset. At that point, automatically, it becomes currency in circulation. Currency in circulation becomes a liability of the central bank. Okay, when the central bank acquires assets, this thing happens. So here I want to highlight, if you buy something, you pay out of your own pocket, then you are not going to be, you are not printer of currency notes. You have to get from somewhere. The government does not print money. Of course, central bank does it for the government, but the government per se does not print money. There should be a mechanism of government getting that money. One way is borrowing from the central bank, making a liability of the government to pay it back. Okay, then if the central bank purchases even a needle, if the central bank purchases, that adds to money supply. That way, those people who are working in the central bank, and they are, of course, they are selling their service, and there can be so many organizations selling services, the goods and services of the central bank, and electricity board and telecom. There are so many organizations like that. For all those services, the central bank pays with cash, printed out of material, and so that much money is added to the system. So, but here we have taken only the major items, not the small items, only the major items. Domestic assets. Now, if you are participating in a training program conducted by the central bank, if the central bank provides you with refreshments, if the provider of refreshment is paid by the central bank with the currency in the world, you also contribute to increase money supply by participating in that program and enjoying the refreshment provided by the central bank. It's like that, right? So there can be so many different ways of money being added to the system. So domestic assets, what are those? The government borrowing instruments, it's simple. When the government acquires treasury bills and bonds, and also here I have to highlight a little bit of a practical situation. If you look at the central bank balance sheet and see the holdings of government debt securities, bonds are not there. Central bank is holding mostly treasury bills. Why? They are short term, because this treasury bill is a liquid asset. Banks also can keep these treasury bills for liquidity management purposes. If the banks are going to make investments in the government debt securities, it is not the bill that they should put their money in, it's the bond. Bond is the investment instrument. Bill is the liquidity management instrument. Therefore, most of the time, central banks acquire and lend into the government treasury bills because they are short term. Because central bank is not supposed to make any financial investments out of printed money. It is not viable, because you can't print money and create inflation. Again, the value of that money will go down. Therefore, it is not allowed. Okay, then the other domestic assets are advances to banks. When the central bank lent to banks, sometimes advances may be the short-term ones. If a bank is under stress, we know central bank also operates like a lender at last resort. If a bank is having financial stress beyond its manageable level, then rather than allowing it to bankrupt and go under, central bank can secure that bank for the sake of entire financial system. If one bank goes down, we know that the banking sector survives on trust people have in the system. If one bank is under stress, people are not going to limit that stress situation only to that bank. They will say, okay, the entire financial system, entire banking system is under stress. So they will try to withdraw money as early as possible. Therefore, even a solid, sound commercial bank may not be able to withstand if there is unexpected huge amount of withdrawals by people. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the central bank to maintain the financial stability, financial system stability, and also make the trust people have in the banking system for the sake of financial system stability again. Therefore, simply because one bank goes under does not mean the central bank will allow it to go bankrupt. Central bank can do whatever possible. Sometimes they can change the management, take over the management, hand it over to some other party, and lend at last resort. Here I like to discuss little bit about this bankrupt situation. You may remember global financial crisis. Global financial crisis, it happened 2008, 7 and 8, went up to 2009. It was there until 2012. During that period, there was a concept called too big to fail. Too big to fail. Because during that period, some people argued if banks have not managed their finances properly, if they are to fail, let them fail. If somebody has not managed its financial operations prudently, and if that person is going to go bankrupt, by securing that person, two things happen. That's the argument. If a person have messed up with his finances, and finally if somebody is going to rescue him, then it gives a sense to that person, okay, no matter what I do, I will have somehow I will have a way out. Then another person also, by looking at this, can start feeling, okay, I also can do the same. That's called moral hazard. People tend to misbehave if you are going to reward misbehavior. That was the argument. If the banks have messed up with their finances, then why should we rescue them? And there was another very interesting argument. When the Greece was under stress, when the German Chancellor Angela Merkel was going to offer some package to rescue Greece, and some German people said, okay, they have messed up their things. Why should we sacrifice our hard-earned money? Why should we sacrifice our hard-earned money to rescue them? Because at that point, Angela Merkel wanted to bail out certain loans. People objected. The argument was that if you do this, the story will not end there. If you do that, story will continue with more people participating in the same category, misbehaving, expecting that something will happen in the future for their benefit. Therefore, this lending to the bank, advances to bank, and being lent at last resort is a topic under debate. Okay, I would like to exchange views like this, because simply by looking at these things will not help you to become an effective banker, to understand the financial system and its operation. Therefore, it is always better to learn something addition. Advances to other institutions that we discussed. Private sector related assets. This is also very special. Private sector related assets. It looks a little bit absurd, but that's why I have put under special circumstances. Again, you may remember during the global financial crisis, a concept called non-conventional monetary policy. Concept called non-conventional monetary policy came. At that point, the entire financial system was under stress, and the share markets collapsed, and so many banks went under. And at one point, the Fed Reserve, that is the Federal Reserve System of USA, central banking system USA, start purchasing assets of the private sector. They purchase assets of the General Motors, but very recently, if you have time and if you have access, read the latest Economist magazine. The latest Economist magazines, it has a title called, let me check. Title called you may say this: free money. And under that, they argue some central bank, the Fed Reserve, is now suggesting to purchase stocks of Apple, Coca-Cola. I did not mark it here, but I remember me reading it. That means what? And because now again, now we have a crisis situation with this COVID-19 pandemic, and global economy is estimated to shrink around 3 to 4%, and countries are pumping huge amount of money to the system. Under this system, they have suggested central banks can acquire assets of the private sector. Some suggested. Let me see. Hold on. Let me read. The state's growing role as capital allocator in chief is the third except new page. To see off credit crunch, the Federal Reserve, acting with the Treasury, has waded into the financial markets, buying up the bonds of AT&T. AT&T is a telecom giant, Apple, even Coca-Cola, and lending directly to everyone from the bond dealers to non-profit hospitals. That means if the economic system is under stress, if liquidity is the problem, there should be a mechanism of central banking helping it. Therefore, on the asset side, there should be assets to make liabilities rise. Liabilities, we know liabilities is the currency in circulation. For that to happen, there should be some way of acquiring those things. If the government borrowing capacity has gone to the limit, you have no any way of channeling funds through the government borrowing mechanism. Therefore, there should be some other situations also. That's why I have put this under special circumstances. This happened during the global financial crisis. This is also again happening under this COVID-19 economic and social health crisis. Okay, these are the interesting ones actually, not the theory per se. You should know exactly what is happening as at now. And based on that, you can predict what is likely to happen in those countries and their impact on our system and their impact on the decision-taking process of the government and the central bank, finally coming to your doorpost accordingly. Then foreign assets, foreign currencies, intervention in domestic foreign exchange market. I want to discuss this also a little bit. Remember, under central bank core functions in, I think, lecture number 2, if I remember correctly, lecture number 2, under central bank core functions, maintaining price stability was one core responsibility of the central bank. And also we discuss the domestic currency has two different values we discussed. That is the domestic value and the international value. Internal value, external value. Maintaining a low and stable inflation rate was to maintain the domestic value of the currency. But if you are going to maintain the exchange rate, stable exchange rate, there you are trying to maintain the external value stable of the currency again. Then we said, even though the central bank is following a freely floating exchange rate system starting from 2000, I remember 2020, some no, 2000. If that should be in your slides. Then central bank is maintaining a freely floating exchange rate system to say that exchange rate is determined purely under market conditions, demand and supply conditions. But even under that, central bank has a responsibility. I have given this note in my note. I have given this very clearly. I invite you to read them and be familiar with that. Even under freely floating exchange rate system, if the rate is highly volatile, central bank has a stake in intervening in the market. If the domestic currency is depreciating fast, central bank has to sell because the buying pressure is there. When the buying pressure is there, buying pressure means that means buying of the dollar. If the shortage of dollar is there, then the buying pressure is there. Then the dollar value goes up. That means rupee value goes down. Currency is under stress. It depreciates fast. And if the currency is appreciating very much, then there is a selling pressure. Then central bank has to purchase. Then now we saw in our central bank balance sheet. Then if the central bank accumulates more reserves, assets increase. Now, if the central bank purchases $1 at the exchange rate of, let's say, 100 rupees, central bank foreign asset holdings increase by $1 and 100 rupees goes out from the central bank to the system. That adds to the currency in circulation. Then central bank liabilities increase by that much. Okay. Then you can see any effort by the central bank, in the domestic foreign exchange market, either on the buying side or on the selling side, makes changes in the central bank balance sheet. in the form of either foreign assets increasing, liabilities increasing, foreign assets decreasing, liabilities decreasing. Clear? Okay. Example. Now here we have an example. Hopefully we can finish this lecture before. Yeah, we have some time. Yeah. I have put an example here. This and this an example. We assume that the US dollar Sri Lankan rupee exchange rate is 100 rupees and central bank CBS acquires 100 million US dollars. 10 million US dollars at 100 rupees. Clear. Because I remember very recently, central bank intervenes in the domestic foreign exchange market purely for the purpose of raising its reserve position. Central bank wanted to raise its reserve position, therefore, not for the exchange rate management purposes, but just for the purpose of building reserves. Central bank purchased dollars from the market, something like that. Okay, central bank acquires $10 million at the exchange rate of 100. Then we know it becomes 1,000 rupees. 1,000 rupees. And also CBSL acquires T-bills. You know, the earlier one is US dollars is foreign assets. Treasury bill is a domestic assets. So we have both components. Treasury bills worth, then we can say accordingly, the total amount of legal tender released to circulation, CIC, from central bank is as follows. So payment for 10 million US dollars and at 100 million. Oh, sorry, I am sorry. Again, I have made a mistake here. Let me correct it. It should be 1,000 million. It should be 1,000 because 100 into 10 is 1,000. Then payment for treasury bill 250. Then altogether, how much has the central bank released? Central bank has released 1,250 million to the circulation. What has happened? Okay, central bank assets, foreign assets has increased by $10 million. Central bank domestic assets in the form of holding treasury bills has increased by 250 million. Impact of both has made currencies in circulation to increase by 1,250. Okay, assets have increased by that much. Liabilities also have increased by that much. Okay, that is the first stage. The first stage is money is going out from the central bank walls. This 1,250 was within central bank walls before central bank acquired these domestic assets and foreign assets. But at the point of payment to those assets, money left the central bank. So earlier there was no any 1,250 outside in circulation, but now 1,250 has been added to the circulation. Okay, then the next question is what happens then? This goes to the public, maybe people, institution, whatever. It goes to the system. Then here we are going to talk about, again, we are going to make an assumption. If public tends to use that amount in the following pattern, the components of money supply can be identified as follows. Okay. Then out of this 1,250, people are going to hold 2,250 million. That is currency held by public. The balance they deposit in the banking system. Okay, when this currency held by public can deposit in the banking system, automatically this should take you to the concept of monetary aggregates, which you by now may have studied under Survey of Financial System and also economics. You may have studied. Okay, money supply is currency held by public and deposits held by public with the banking system. That's the money supply. Okay, what has happened? Money supply has increased by 1,250. All are in cash form. I have put there, the story does not end there. As banking systems start credit creation process using newly received deposit liabilities of, now it should be actually deposit liabilities of 1,000. We know that the foundation for the banks to create credit is the deposit they get. Again, I am not going to discuss about the credit creation process of the banking system, but we can have a simple example here also. Okay. Now we left that, okay, out of 1,250 people kept 1,200 people kept 2,050 rupees, million rupees with them. The balance 1,000 rupees went to the banks. Okay, this is that 1,000 rupees. That 1,000 rupees is this. This is the original round of cash deposit. That's the first round of creation credit. Okay. Now, when the banks get this 1,000 rupees in the form of deposit liabilities, if the reserve ratio is 10%, out of this 1,000, 10% means 100 million rupees has to be kept in the central bank. Then commercial banks are left with 900 million rupees to lend. Okay, they can lend. Then once they lend in the form of, and here I am not going to discuss about the credit creation process of the banking system. I expect you to have known it, because earlier on the certificate level this is discussed. We know that if the entire credit expansion process is through checks, there is no leakage. There is no any leakage out of the banking system. So money will be within the banking system. And also other assumption is whenever there is capacity for commercial banks to lend, commercial banks will be able to lend. There will be ready-made demand for credit. So this process will continue. At the same time, the other thing is commercial banks will not keep any excess reserves. They will keep only the required reserves in the banking system. So there are three conditions. Entire financial transaction takes place through checks. That means there is no leakage of funds from the system, and there's readily available credit demand for commercial banks to lend whenever they have the capacity, and also banks do not keep excess reserves. If this is the case, this process continues. And they lend 900 rupees, again, that come in the form of deposits. Again, they keep 10% of that lend balance. It goes as deposits. Again, 10% is left. Again, they give. Finally, this process will continue until the entire process dies down. Then these are the final values. Finally, what has happened? The original 1,000 rupee deposit liability has become 10,000 rupee deposit liability. Original reserves of 100 rupees has become 1,000 rupees of 1,000 million, 1 billion rupees of reserves. And original credit has become 9,000. So if you look at very carefully, this is the amount, total amount that the banking system created through the credit creation process. Because this is the original deposit that was in the form of cash. Now it has grown up to 10,000. So the difference between these two is 9,000. This has been created by the commercial banking system in the form of credit. Okay. Now there's an interesting relationship. I want to highlight that here. Important relationships. Let's look at them. Initial stage, monetary base. What is the monetary base? Currency in circulation. It's a liability. We know that currency in circulation is a liability of the central bank. That was the initial step, 1,250 central bank operations. Okay, it was there. What was the reason for this? Central bank purchased domestic assets and also foreign assets. Central bank purchased dollars. Central bank also invested in government debt securities. Second stage, what happened? When the public got that money, they kept 250 with them and balance they deposited with the bank. Then CP plus D is the money supply, narrow money supply. So that is not because of central bank operations, but because of public behavior. Public behavior. That's the way the people wish to have. They kept part of the money they received in the form of cash, and the balance they deposited with the banking system. Then the final stage. What has happened? Currency held by public is the same. Because now we are taking, neither money is coming in other than original 1,000. No, it is leaking out until the whole process continues. Then finally, deposit had become 10,000. So 10,250 is the money supply now at the last stage. That is operations of banking system, end of create condition. That is this. In the last stage, this has happened. Then the final stage, monetary base. Do you know monetary base is reserves? Okay, we have it. And reserves is 1,000. Okay, this is this 1,000. And also currency held by public. What has happened? The entire deposits that were made in cash at the final stage has ended up at the central bank. Why? At each round of credit creation, fraction of that money is flowing into the central bank in the form of required reserves. When the process ends, the entire deposit base in the form of cash goes to the central bank, and money supply and banking system creates this much. Finally, economy has money supply of this much. Then money supply final stage minus the initial stage. The final stage is 10,250, and final stage, okay, initial stage 1,250. Then the balance is 900. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry again. Here it should be 1,000. That is this 1,000. Please correct your note also accordingly. This 1,000, that was the amount created by the banking system. Okay, then the conclusion. What is the conclusion? Conclusion: acquisition of assets by the central bank has enabled the banking system to create liquidity of rupees 1,000 million, in addition to the initial addition of 1,250. Initial addition was coming from the central bank. That was purely legal tender. 9,000 is bank money. That is not the legal tender issued by the central bank as the authority of issuing the currency, but that 9,000 is the money created by the banking system. Now you can see how the banking system also involves in liquidity creation. Central bank pumps money, that is the legal tender. That provides the foundation basis for the banking system to create more credit using that. Important thing is this. This credit creation process is not the subject of this syllabus, but we should know it. Important thing is this. Then we have to be very careful. The central bank has to be very careful in engaging in those operations, simply because that's why there are checks and balances. There are checks and balances. At another lecture, we will discuss. That's a very, very interesting topic. That is market operations. We will just discuss that, how the central bank, the market operations committee of the central bank operates, and what were the information that they take and how they are processed, what factors they decide in deciding, it takes into account when deciding policies, and all those things we will discuss. Okay, our next lecture will be monetary policy. And monetary policy, you may have studied monetary policy to some extent now, but we are going to discuss about the latest monetary policy practices of the central bank and what were the monetary policy principles Central Bank of Sri Lanka was using earlier, what are the new developments, and why the central bank is moving towards those new developments, and what are the other countries using such developments, and both characteristics of both systems, that is the old system and new system, we will discuss. Okay, now we have around 3 minutes. Apparently we have 5 members. Any questions? Do you have any questions? Sayumi? And also Gerald? Any questions? There are, oh, hold on. Oh, but there are 2 messages. I can't read them. Sorry, I can't read them. Okay. If there is no any question, we can stop this, and again we can meet next Sunday. But feel free to send any comments. If you think I am going a little bit faster than you can grasp, I can adjust myself. And if you think I want to repeat certain things, let me know. Gerald, yes, so no presentation. Online, no presentation. Sorry? There was no presentation? Oh, I'm sorry. Can anybody respond? Okay. It was in the class, but not the presented during the session. So, oh, I'm sorry. I am also new to this system, but next time, whatever the problems we will discuss. I hope that you understood me. Since you had the presentation with you, I think you understood me. Gerald, did you understand me? Okay, thank you, Buddha. Okay, then I can't say nice weekend because weekend is over. Have a nice, healthy and safe week to come. I know that Sunday evening is not a comfortable time for all of us because tomorrow morning we have to go to work and the free time is over. Anyway, okay, thank you very much for listening to me. And I expect you to be a little bit talkative because I am prepared to listen to any comment. Then that is the way that we can improve our understanding. Feel free to ask any questions. Next time we will go to another session. Thank you very much. Good night.